A man can survive 8 years alone, but surviving ain't the same as living. The sun broke
I
over
won't
Broken
stand
Creek
by and let
Ranch
this
like a
happen.
promise
Your
that didn't
actions will
know
only
it was
bring more
lying.
trouble.
Please
Dalton
stop this.
Kincaid
I must.
stood at the split
This changes
rail fence
nothing.
he built
It's not
with his
meant to
own
change.
hands,
It's
watching
meant to settle.
steam rise
Then consider
from
it
his coffee
settled.
cup into the cool Texas morning. The land stretched before him in endless waves of buffalo grass and mesquite. 500 head of cattle scattered across 2,300 acres of hard-won territory. 8 years, 2,920 days, give or take. Not that he was counting. His hands, scarred and calloused from nearly a decade of solitary work, wrapped tight around the tin cup. The coffee was bitter black, strong enough to strip paint. He'd forgotten how to make it any other way. Forgotten a lot of things, truth be told. The sound of a woman's laughter, the weight of a child in his arms, the feeling that tomorrow might hold something besides more fence to mend, more cattle to doctor, more silence stretching out like the land itself. The fence line needed work, always did. 3 posts leaning east from last month's windstorm wire sagging between them like the shoulders of a tired man. Dalton set his cup on the fence rail and pulled his work gloves from his back pocket, the leather soft and shaped to his hands from years of use. A good pair of gloves was worth more than sentiment out here, worth more than memory. He walked the fence line with the practiced eye of a man who'd learned to see the small failures before they became disasters. The wire had stretched, losing its tension. He ran his thumb along the barbed strand, feeling for weak spots, finding 3 places where rust had begun its patient work of dissolution. By noon, he'd have it fixed. By sunset, he'd have forgotten he'd done it. That was the rhythm of his days now, work that erased itself, effort that left no mark except on his own aging body. The cattle were Herefords, mostly white-faced and sturdy, bred for the harsh panhandle climate. He'd started with 50 head 8 years back, built the herd through careful breeding and caution that bordered on paranoia. Every calf represented $10 come spring. 50 calves this year meant $500 minus the cost of feed and salt and the 100 small expenses that ate into profit like moths in wool. $2,000 in a good year if the weather held and the rustlers stayed away and the bank didn't decide to call in notes that men couldn't pay. He kept the numbers in his head, a constant calculation that never quite balanced. $8,000 the ranch was worth, maybe, if a man counted land and cattle and the sturdy cabin he'd raised from raw timber. The saddle alone had cost $40 back in '74, and it would outlast him if he cared for it proper. His grandfather's Colt revolver, the one that had seen him through the war, and after no price you could put on that. Some things weren't about money. Some things were about staying alive. Dalton pulled wire from the roll he kept in the shed, measuring by eye the length he'd need. The fence stretched, needed 3 wraps around the post pulled tight, with the come-along until the wire sang like a guitar string when you plucked it. His grandfather had taught him that back before the world went to hell, and heroes turned to ghosts. Tight fences made good neighbors, the old man used to say. Tight fences and a ready gun. The gun rode on his hip even now, a habit from his years as a Texas Ranger. The holster was oiled and supple, positioned for a cross-draw that his body remembered even when his mind was elsewhere. 4 years he'd worn the badge from 68 to 72, tracking murderers and rustlers across a territory that didn't much care for law. He'd been good at it. Too good, maybe. Good enough that when the killing got to be too much, when he'd seen too many men die over things that didn't matter, he'd handed in the badge and tried to build something different. That was when he met Sarah. When he'd believed for one brief and shining moment that a man could leave the violence behind and build something clean. The memory came unbidden, the way they always did. Sarah, with her dark hair pinned up flour on her hands, laughing at something he'd said. Sarah, heavy with child, her hands on her belly, feeling the life move within. Sarah's screams in the night, the midwife's grim face, the stillness that followed. The grave he'd dug under the cottonwood tree, 2 bodies in one coffin, because he couldn't bear to separate them. 8 years since that night in March of '74. 8 years since he'd buried his wife and his son, and every hope he'd carried for a different kind of life. The Kincaid trouble had come that same year, as if fate had decided he hadn't suffered enough. 3 men riding onto his land with guns and legal papers that weren't worth the ink they were written in. He'd given them a chance to leave. They'd drawn first. He'd been faster. And when it was done, when 3 bodies lay cooling in the Texas dust, he'd known he couldn't stay near civilization anymore. The trial had cleared him self-defense, legal and proper, but the looks in people's eyes hadn't changed. He was the man who'd killed 3 Kincaids in one afternoon. The hermit, the killer, the ghost. So he'd come here, built this ranch with his own hands. And for 8 years he'd managed to convince himself it was enough. Dalton worked the wire with hands that knew the motion, wrapping, pulling, twisting the ends together with the fence pliers. The work was meditative, thoughtless, the kind of labor that let a man's mind wander into dangerous territory. He thought about Sarah less these days, thought about the future even less. There was only the fence, the cattle, the unending work of keeping chaos at bay. By the time the sun reached its zenith, he'd repaired 5 posts and 100 yards of wire. His shirt was soaked through with sweat despite the autumn chill. The work felt good, felt right, felt like the only honest thing left in a world that had taken too much and given back too little. He was coiling the excess wire when he saw the rider coming up the long drive. Dalton's hand moved to his gun without thought, years of training overriding 8 years of isolation. But the rider was alone, young, sitting his horse, with the easy confidence of someone who'd been born to it. Dalton relaxed fractionally, but didn't move his hand far from the colt. The boy, he couldn't have been more than 19, reined in 20 feet away, showing sense enough to keep his distance from an armed man he didn't know. "Mr. Kincaid." "That's right. Name's Tommy Sullivan. Work for my Uncle Ezra, the spread east of here." Dalton nodded. He knew Ezra Sullivan by reputation, knew the man ran honest cattle and paid his hands fair. Good enough. "What brings you out, Tommy?" The boy shifted in his saddle, looking uncomfortable. "Uncle Ezra sent me. Thought you'd want to know there's something happening in town today. Well, a matching, I guess you'd call it. Mail order brides come in on the stage." Dalton felt something twist in his chest. "Not my concern." "No, sir, I reckon not. But Uncle Ezra, he thought you might need supplies soon, thought you might be heading to town anyway, and you should know it's going to be crowded. Folks coming from 3 counties over." The boy was right about the supplies. Dalton's coffee was running low, down to maybe a week's worth if he rationed it. Salt for the cattle, ammunition for the rifle. A dozen small things that couldn't wait much longer. "I appreciate the word," Dalton said. Tommy nodded, started to turn his horse, then stopped. "Mr. Kincaid, Uncle Ezra, also said to tell you that Warren Grayson's running the whole thing. The matching, I mean. Says he's doing the town a service, helping young ladies find husbands." The boy's voice carried a note of something Dalton couldn't quite identify. Disgust, maybe, or warning. "Grayson?" Dalton said the name, leaving a bitter taste. "Should have known." "Yes, sir. Anyway, I've said my piece." Tommy touched his hat and rode off, leaving Dalton alone with thoughts he didn't want and a decision he hadn't asked for. Warren Grayson, cattle baron banker, the man who'd bought up half the panhandle and was working on the other half. Dalton had tangled with Grayson once, back when he still wore the ranger badge, over a matter of water rights and suspicious cattle counts. Nothing had come of it. Grayson was too smart to get caught, too well connected to be touched. But Dalton had seen the coldness in the man's eyes, the calculation that treated people like numbers in a ledger. If Grayson was running a mail-order bride matching, it wasn't out of Christian charity. Dalton looked at the fence half repaired, looked at the cabin solid and empty, looked at the sky blue and vast and indifferent to the small struggles of small men. He needed coffee, needed ammunition, needed to stop thinking about brides and matchings and the sound of a woman's voice in his empty house. "Hell with it," he said to the wind, and went to saddle his horse. The town of Redemption Springs had been built on optimism and abandoned by reality. It crouched in the shadow of the Cap Rock, a collection of false-fronted buildings and broken dreams. The silver mine that had spawned it had played out in '78, leaving behind a population that was too stubborn to leave and too poor to prosper. Now it survived on cattle and hope in roughly equal measure. Dalton rode in from the north, his horse picking its way down the rutted main street. The town was crowded, just like Tommy had said. Wagons lined both sides of the street, ranch hands and townsmen mingling in groups, their voices carrying the particular buzz of men anticipating spectacle. He tied his horse at the general store and stepped onto the boardwalk, already regretting the decision to come. The store was packed, women clustered around the dry goods men, loitering near the counter. Dalton worked his way through the crowd, gathered what he needed with the efficiency of someone who hated shopping. Coffee salt ammunition, 47 cents worth of survival. He was paying when he heard it, the sound of a crowd gathering, voices rising in the particular pitch of entertainment about to begin. Through the store window, he could see people streaming toward the town hall, a weathered building that served as courthouse, church, and community center, depending on the day's needs. "They're starting the matching," the clerk said, counting out Dalton's change. "You going to watch?" "No." "Might be entertaining." "Grayson's brought in 3 of them. Young ones, too, from what I hear." Dalton pocketed his change and gathered his supplies. He meant to leave, meant to mount his horse and ride back to the safety of his empty ranch, but his feet carried him toward the town hall, drawn by something he couldn't name and didn't want to examine. The hall was packed, every bench filled, men standing along the walls. Dalton found a spot in the back near the door where he could see but not be seen, where he could leave when common sense reasserted itself. At the front of the hall, Warren Grayson stood like a preacher at a pulpit. He was 52 years old and looked younger, his hair still dark, his suit tailored and expensive. Money had been kind to him. Power had been kinder. "Gentlemen," Grayson said, his voice carrying the smooth authority of a man used to being heard. "And ladies, of course. We gather here today in the spirit of community and Christian charity." Dalton almost laughed at that. Christian charity, from Warren Grayson. "As you know, the frontier can be a lonely place. Good women are scarce and good men—" Grayson paused, let the smile touch his lips. "Well, good men are even scarcer. But we're fortunate today. 3 young ladies have traveled from back east seeking honest husbands and new lives. They come to us in good faith, trusting in our honor and our intentions." He gestured to the side of the hall, where 3 women sat in chairs arranged like exhibits. Dalton's eyes moved over them without interest. A girl barely 16, her face pale with fear. A widow, maybe 45, her hands work-worn and her expression tired, and his breath caught. The 3rd woman sat with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. She was young, maybe 26, dressed in a simple traveling suit that had seen better days. Dark blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun. A face that wouldn't launch ships but might haunt a man's dreams if he let it. But it was her bearing that stopped him. Steady and dignified, looking out at the crowd with neither hope nor fear, just a kind of resigned courage that spoke of someone who'd already survived the worst and was still standing. She reminded him of Sarah. Not in looks, Sarah had been dark, where this woman was fair, but in that quality of strength wrapped in softness, steel beneath silk. Grayson was still talking. "Our first young lady is Miss Sarah Morrison, age 16, daughter of the late Marcus Morrison, an excellent cook, skilled in all domestic arts." The girl stood when called, her legs trembling. Grayson read her terms like an auctioneer calling livestock. Marriage to a suitable husband, immediate consummation of contract, no provision for dissolution. 2 men bid for her, a rancher in his 40s and a shopkeeper whose wife had died the previous winter. The rancher won with an offer of $20 and a two-room house. The girl looked like she might faint. No one seemed to notice. Our second lady is Mrs. Martha Henderson, widow of John Henderson, experienced in household management and child rearing. The widow stood with more composure. Her terms were more reasonable marriage with a 6-month trial period, wages for household work if the arrangement dissolved. A farmer took her, a decent-looking man with kind eyes and 3 motherless children. That one might work out all right, Dalton thought. Might. Then Grayson turned to the third woman, and his voice took on a different quality. Possession, maybe, or hunger. And finally we have Miss Temperance Ashford, known as Tempe. 26 years of age, daughter of the late Robert Ashford of Philadelphia. Educated at the Chestnut Street Female Seminary, trained as a teacher, accomplished in literature and music. The woman Tempe stood. She moved with the careful control of someone who knew that any crack in her composure would shatter her completely. Her traveling suit was faded but clean mended in places with tiny, careful stitches. Her shoes were Eastern City shoes, completely impractical for ranch life. Everything about her screamed refinement fallen on hard times. Grayson held up a document. Miss Ashford comes to us under somewhat unique circumstances. Her father, Robert Ashford, borrowed money from my bank to cover medical expenses during his final illness. The sum of $300 at an interest rate of 40% per annum. That's usury, someone called from the crowd. Illegal in Texas. Grayson smiled. The loan was made in Philadelphia, where such rates are regrettably legal. Mr. Ashford's death 4 months ago left the debt to his only heir, Miss Ashford. The amount now stands at $420, including compounded interest. Dalton felt his jaw clench. $420, more than most men made in a year, an impossible sum for a woman alone. However, Grayson continued, I'm prepared to forgive this debt entirely in exchange for Miss Ashford's hand in marriage. The terms are standard marriage cohabitation, all rights and privileges thereof. He said it clinically, but the hunger in his eyes was anything but clinical. Tempe stood silent, her face a mask, but Dalton could see her hands clenched so tight her knuckles were white. Any other offers? Grayson asked, his tone making it clear he expected none. Silence filled the hall. No one bid against Warren Grayson. No one crossed the most powerful man in 3 counties over a woman they didn't know. Dalton watched Tempe's face, watched the moment she accepted her fate, the way her shoulders dropped just slightly, the way her gaze went somewhere far away. She was preparing herself for what came next, for a life with a man she could see was cruel, for a marriage that would be a prison sentence paid out in installments of dignified suffering. He'd seen that look before. On the faces of men, about to hang on the faces of soldiers before a battle they knew they wouldn't survive. The look of someone who'd run out of choices and was making peace with it. His feet were moving before his brain caught up. Through the crowd, men parting before him because he was taller than most and carried himself like violence barely restrained. To the front of the hall, to the space between Grayson and the woman who was about to throw her life away. Hold on, Dalton heard himself say. She read the terms on that contract. Grayson's smile froze. Kincaid. Didn't expect to see you here. And I asked a question. Tempe was looking at him now, intelligent eyes sharp with caution. Up close she was even more striking. A small scar at her temple nearly hidden by her hair. Hands that showed ink stains, a reader, a writer. A woman who'd worked with her mind, now reduced to selling herself to pay a dead man's debts. The contract is standard, Grayson said, his voice tight. Standard for what indentured servitude? Dalton turned to Tempe, spoke directly to her. Ma'am, you understand what all rights and privileges means in his contract? Means you can't say no, ever, to anything that what you want. Color rose in her cheeks, but her voice when she spoke was steady. What I want stopped mattering the day my father died. Mr. Kincaid, Dalton Kincaid, Mr. Kincaid. She met his eyes without flinching. I appreciate your concern. But I know exactly what I'm agreeing to. I've run out of choices. No, ma'am, you've run out of good choices. But there's always one more option. And what would that be? The words came out before he could stop them, before he could think about what he was doing or why or what the hell had possessed him after 8 years of carefully constructed isolation. Marry me instead. The hall went silent. Even Grayson looked shocked, though he recovered quickly. You can't be serious, Grayson said. Dalton ignored him, kept his eyes on Tempe. I can pay the debt. $420, you said, plus interest accruing daily, Grayson started. $420, Dalton said firmly. I'll pay it. Today. Cash. And what exactly are you offering in exchange? Tempe asked, her voice careful, controlled. The same terms, different master, same chains. No, ma'am, I'm offering a partnership. You'd have your own room, your own space. Help with the ranch work, learn what needs learning. We split whatever profit the cattle bring. After a year, you're free to leave with your share, or stay if that's what you choose. But it's your choice. Always. She studied him with steady eyes, and Dalton felt exposed in a way he hadn't felt in 8 years. She was measuring him, weighing him, trying to determine if he was another kind of trap or something that might be escape. Why? She asked. Why would you do this? It was a fair question. Dalton didn't have a good answer. Didn't even have a bad one that made sense. Because I've got a ranch that could use 2 sets of hands. Because I remember what it's like to run out of choices. And because... He stopped, struggled for words. Because you shouldn't have to pay for your father's bad luck with the rest of your life. Grayson stepped forward. This is ridiculous. Kincaid, you don't have $420. You're a hermit rancher barely scraping by. Dalton pulled the leather pouch from his coat pocket, dropped it on the table with a solid thunk. Count it. The justice of the peace opened the pouch with shaking hands. Gold coins spilled out, catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Double eagles, eagles, half eagles, 2 years of careful saving, of eating beans and bacon, of fixing his own equipment instead of buying new. $500 in gold that he'd been saving for expanding his herd come spring. The justice counted twice, his lips moving silently. $500 even. Grayson's face had gone purple. This is highly irregular. Miss Ashford and I have a contract. No, sir, Tempe said quietly. We have a debt, not a contract. I never signed anything. Your father's debt is your obligation, which Mr. Kincaid is offering to pay. She turned to Dalton. If I agree to this partnership, I want it in writing. The terms you stated. My own room, equal share of profits, freedom to leave after 1 year. Fair enough? And I want a witness, someone who'll hold you to those terms if you forget them. Dalton nodded toward the justice. Judge Carver can write it up legal. No. Tempe's eyes swept the crowd, landed on a weathered man standing near the front. You, sir, you look honest. Would you witness this agreement? The man stepped forward, and Dalton recognized Ezra Sullivan, Tommy's uncle. Good man, fair dealer. Be happy to miss, Ezra said. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur. Judge Carver drew up the papers, his hand shaking slightly as he wrote out terms that were probably illegal in half a dozen ways. Marriage certificate on one page, partnership agreement on another. Tempe read every word twice, asked questions, requested changes. She wanted specific numbers, percentage of profits, definition of expenses, clear timeline for the trial period. She wasn't just educated, she was smart. Sharp enough to protect herself even when she had no leverage. Finally, she looked up from the papers. One more thing, Mr. Kincaid. Yes, ma'am. I won't promise to obey you, not in the marriage vows. That word gets struck or I don't sign. Dalton felt something that might have been respect. Fair enough. And my name is Temperance. Tempe, if you prefer. Not ma'am, not miss. We're going to be partners, might as well start with names. Dalton. She offered her hand. He took it. Her grip was firm, her palm soft but not weak. The hand of someone who'd worked with books and pens, not cattle and wire. That would change, he thought. Ranch work, changed everything. Judge Carver cleared his throat. "If we're ready," they stood before him, two strangers making promises neither quite understood. The traditional words altered where Tempe had insisted. Dalton's responses automatic, his mind still trying to catch up with what he'd done. Tempe's voice steady, clear, making vows she'd probably never wanted to make to a man she'd met 10 minutes ago. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Judge Carver closed his book. "God help you both." Grayson had left during the ceremony, his departure marked by the slam of the hall door. But Dalton could feel the man's rage like heat from a forge. This wasn't over. Men like Warren Grayson didn't accept defeat, especially not public humiliation. But that was tomorrow's problem. Today, Dalton Kincaid had a wife, a partner, a woman standing beside him with a carpetbag full of her life and eyes that held more questions than he had answers for. "Mrs. Kincaid," he said, testing the name. It felt strange, felt wrong, felt like a betrayal of Sarah's memory. "Mr. Kincaid," she replied. Then softer, "Dalton, we should go. It's a 2-hour ride to the ranch." She nodded, collected her bag. As they walked toward the door, Ezra Sullivan fell in step beside them. "That was a good thing you did, Dalton," Ezra said quietly. "Or the stupidest thing in 8 years. "Maybe both." Ezra glanced at Tempe, who walked slightly ahead, her back straight despite exhaustion. "She's got spine, that one. You could do worse. Could do better, too." "Could you?" Ezra asked and walked away before Dalton could answer. Outside, the afternoon sun was slanting toward evening. Dalton's horse stood patient at the hitching rail. One horse. He'd ridden into town alone, would be riding out with a wife. He hadn't thought this through. Hadn't thought at all, just acted on an impulse that was going to complicate his life in ways he couldn't begin to calculate. "Can you ride?" he asked Tempe. "I've ridden. Not well, but I can stay on." He helped her into the saddle, trying not to notice the warmth of her waist under his hands, the way she smelled of lavender soap and train smoke. She arranged herself side saddle, her traveling skirt spread over the horse's flank. "That won't work for ranch riding," Dalton said. "You'll need to sit astride. I'm aware it's not proper, but proper doesn't matter out here. Only practical." She nodded, gathered her skirts, and swung her other leg over. For a moment her ankles were visible, and Dalton looked away quickly. The intimacy of it startled him. This woman was his wife. Legally, she belonged to him in ways that made him uncomfortable to contemplate. He swung up behind her, reached around to take the reins. She stiffened at his nearness, and he couldn't blame her. They were strangers, pressed together on a horse heading toward a home she'd never seen, to begin a life neither had chosen. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm fine." "Long ride ahead. You can lean back if you need to. I won't take it wrong." I said, "I'm fine." They rode out of Redemption Springs in silence, leaving behind the whispers and stares, heading north toward land that stretched empty to the horizon. Toward a ranch that had been built for solitude, now complicated by the weight of another person's expectations. The sun painted the grassland gold and amber. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals only it could feel. The horse's hooves beat a steady rhythm against hard-packed earth. Tempe held herself rigid for the first mile, then gradually relaxed her body, swaying with the horse's motion, still not leaning back, still maintaining distance, protecting herself the only way she could. Dalton found himself noticing things, the way her hair was starting to come loose from its pins, the straightness of her spine, the careful way she held her hands like someone trying not to touch more than necessary. She was afraid of him, of the situation of the future she'd just signed herself into, but she was facing it with dignity and courage, and that was worth something, worth more than he'd thought to find in Redemption Springs on a random Tuesday afternoon. The ranch came into view as the sun touched the horizon. The cabin sat solid and square, smoke rising from the chimney where he'd banked the morning fire. The barn and corral spread out behind it, the whole operation neat and functional. Not much to look at, but honest. Built with his own hands, every board and nail a small victory against chaos. Tempe took it in without comment. He helped her down, tried not to notice how light she was, how she trembled slightly when her feet touched ground. Travel-worn, exhausted, probably terrified. Beginning to understand exactly what she'd traded for freedom from debt. "It's not much," Dalton said. "It's more than I expected." He showed her inside. The cabin was one large room with a loft above. Table and chairs he'd made himself, the stove black iron and temperamental. Shelves lined with supplies. And at the far end, a door. "That was my mother's room," Dalton said. "It's yours now. I sleep in the loft." Tempe looked at the door, then back at him. "You're sure? I'm sure. Partnership means partnership. You get privacy, same as me." She nodded slowly. "Thank you. There's water in the basin for washing. I'll see to the horse, then get dinner started. Nothing fancy, just beans and bacon." "I can cook," she offered. "Not tonight. Tonight you rest." She looked like she might argue, then didn't. Just nodded and carried her carpet bag to the room that would be hers. The door closed softly behind her, and Dalton stood in the empty space wondering what in God's name he'd done. He'd survived 8 years alone, had built a life out of silence and solitude, had found a kind of peace in the absence of other people's expectations. And in one impulsive moment, he'd thrown it all away for a woman with intelligent eyes and more pride than sense. The horse needed tending. The fire needed banking. Dinner needed cooking. Work that would fill the evening and keep him from thinking about the woman in his mother's room, probably crying into her pillow where he couldn't hear. But as he stepped outside into the gathering dark, Dalton found himself hoping she wasn't crying. Hoping that maybe, just maybe, this foolish thing he'd done might turn out to be something other than a mistake. The stars were coming out, scattered across the sky like spilled salt. Somewhere out there, Warren Grayson was planning revenge. Somewhere closer, his new wife was trying to sleep in a strange bed, in a strange house with a strange man just outside her door. And Dalton Kincaid, who'd thought he knew what lonely meant, was learning that having someone near could be the loneliest feeling of all. The first week taught them both what awkward meant. Tempe woke before dawn that first morning, disoriented by unfamiliar walls and the absolute silence of the plains. In Philadelphia, there had always been noise carriages on cobblestones, vendors calling their wares the constant hum of city life. Here the silence was so complete it had weight pressing against her ears like water. She dressed quickly in the dim light, her fingers fumbling with buttons and laces. The room was spare but clean, a bed with a corn husk mattress that rustled when she moved, a small dresser empty, a window that looked east toward land that went on forever. Her entire life fit in the carpet bag at the foot of the bed. 26 years reduced to 3 dresses, undergarments, her mother's Bible, and the last letter her father had written before the laudanum took him past the point of coherent words. She could hear Dalton moving in the main room, the scrape of the stove door, the clank of the coffee pot. Domestic sounds that should have been comforting, but only reminded her how strange this all was. How yesterday she'd been preparing to marry a man she despised, and today she was married to a man she didn't know at all. When she emerged, Dalton was at the stove, his back to her. He'd already dressed, already started the fire, already begun the day while she'd lain paralyzed by uncertainty in the next room. "Morning," he said without turning. "Good morning. Coffee's ready, cups on the shelf there." She poured, grateful for something to do with her hands. The coffee was bitter and strong, nothing like the delicate tea she'd served in Philadelphia parlors. She sipped it anyway, felt it burn down her throat, wake something that had been sleeping. Dalton turned from the stove with 2 plates. Bacon, fried eggs, biscuits that looked like they'd been made by someone who understood the chemistry but not the art. They sat at the table, an expanse of silence between them, wider than the wood. "I thought today I'd show you around the ranch," Dalton said. "Let you get your bearings. Tomorrow we can start on the real work." "What kind of work?" "Depends." Can you cook? Tempe felt heat rise to her cheeks. I can prepare tea service, I can make aspic and syllabub and other useless things, but ranch cooking beans and bacon and bread that won't break teeth, no. Then you'll learn. Can you sew? Yes, that I can do. Good. Always mending to be done. Shirts tear, pants wear through. Can you ride? I told you, not well. Then you'll learn that too. He said it matter-of-factly, not unkind, but not particularly patient either. This was the reality of ranch life. Either you learned or you failed, and failure meant something more serious than embarrassment. They ate in silence. The eggs were good, cooked in bacon grease until the edges were crispy. The biscuits were dry, but edible. Tempe forced herself to eat even though her stomach was knotted with anxiety. She'd need strength for whatever came next. After breakfast, Dalton showed her the ranch with the methodical patience of a man explaining something he knew too well. The barn, first solid post and beam construction smelling of hay and horse and old leather. 3 stalls, though only 1 horse currently occupied them. Your horse, she asked. Buck, he's 15 years old, steady as they come. We'll get you your own mount when we can afford it. For now you'll ride him when I don't need him. The tack room held saddles, oiled and cared for bridles hanging neat tools she couldn't name. Dalton touched each piece as he named it. Curry comb, hoof pick, farrier's rasp, the vocabulary of a life she'd never imagined living. Outside, he walked her along the fence line, showed her how to check for tension in the wire, how to spot posts leaning before they fell. Explained the rotation of pastures, the importance of water, access, the constant arithmetic of grass and cattle, and profit measured in fractions. 500 head, he said, gesturing at the cattle scattered across the nearest pasture. Herefords mostly. Each cow produces 1 calf per year, if we're lucky. Each calf worth about $10 come spring when we sell them. That's $500 if we have a perfect year, which we never do. Minus the cost of feed salt, veterinary care, equipment repair. Last year I cleared $2,000. Year before that, $1,500. That's, Tempe did the math in her head. That's not very much. No, it's not. But it's honest, and it's mine. They walked to the creek that gave the ranch its name. Broken Creek, named for the way it split around a massive boulder, dividing and rejoining like a promise that couldn't quite hold together. The water ran clear over smooth stones shallow enough to wade. Creek never runs dry, Dalton said, even in drought years. That's why this land's valuable. Water means life out here. Tempe knelt by the water, trailed her fingers through it. Cold, clean nothing like the murky Schuylkill she'd known in Philadelphia. She could see straight to the bottom, see the small fish darting between rocks, see her own reflection wavering in the current. Who was she now? Not the teacher she'd been. Not the daughter anymore. Not quite a wife despite the papers they'd signed. Something in between undefined learning a new language for a life she'd never chosen. You all right? Dalton asked. Just tired. It's a lot, I know. She stood, wiped her hands on her skirt. When do we start the real work? Tomorrow soon enough, for you. Tomorrow's fine. But tomorrow came with its own challenges. The first was breakfast. Dalton handed her a bowl of sourdough starter that smelled like fermented despair and told her to make biscuits. I don't know how. Then you'll learn. Flour's in the bin there, salt in the crock, lard in the cool box. Mix it until it feels right, roll it out, cut rounds, bake until golden. How much flour? Enough. How do I know when it feels right? You'll know. It was infuriating. Tempe had been educated by women who believed in precise measurements and proper instruction. 2 cups of this, 1 teaspoon of that, bake at such and such temperature for exactly this many minutes. Dalton's method was pure intuition, built on years of experience he couldn't articulate. The first batch came out hard as rocks. The second batch burned. The third batch was edible but heavy, sitting in her stomach like regret. Dalton ate them without complaint, but she saw the way he chewed carefully, the way he reached for extra coffee to wash them down. "They're terrible," she said. "They're learning. There's a difference. Always." He pushed his plate away, stood. "Come on. Time for riding lessons." Buck was patient with her incompetence. Tempe mounted awkwardly, her skirts tangling, her balance uncertain. Dalton adjusted the stirrups, showed her how to hold the reins, explained the basic commands. "Heel to go, pull to stop pressure with your legs to turn." "But mostly," he said, "just stay on. Buck knows what he's doing, even if you don't." They walked circles in the corral for an hour. Tempe's thighs screamed. Her back ached. The side saddle felt precarious, unbalanced, designed to look pretty rather than work practically. "This won't do," Dalton said finally. "You need to sit astride." "That's not proper. Proper doesn't work cattle." He brought out a pair of his old pants, mended and cut down. "Put these on. We'll get you proper riding clothes when we go to town next." Tempe took the pants to her room, stared at them like they might bite. She'd never worn men's clothing in her life. But he was right. The side saddle was impossible for real riding. She changed quickly, the fabric rough against skin, used to silk and cotton. When she emerged, Dalton didn't comment, just helped her back into the saddle. Astride was better, more stable, more secure. She could feel the horse's muscles moving beneath her, could balance with her whole body instead of just half. They circled the corral again, and this time when Dalton nudged Buck into a trot, she managed to stay on. "Good," Dalton said, and meant it. The days developed a rhythm. Wake before dawn, fire in the stove, coffee strong enough to float horseshoes, breakfast that Tempe made with decreasing disaster, then work different every day, but always physical, always demanding. Dalton taught her to mend fence, her soft hands blistering on the wire. Taught her to check cattle for illness, reading health in the clarity of their eyes and the condition of their coats. Taught her to split kindling, the axe heavy in her hands until muscle memory made it lighter. Taught her to rope the lasso spinning wild until she found the rhythm of it. He was a patient teacher when she was willing to learn, harsh when she complained, silent when she struggled, letting her find her own way through problems. "Why won't you just tell me?" she asked once, frustrated with a knot that wouldn't hold. "Because telling doesn't teach. Doing teaches." That's not how education works. Maybe not your education, but it's how ranch education works. She learned, slowly, painfully, with setbacks that made her want to cry, and victories so small they shouldn't have mattered, but did. The first batch of biscuits that rose properly. The first calf she helped doctor holding its head while Dalton treated screwworm. The first time she stayed on Buck at a canter, the world blurring past, as exhilaration replaced fear. 2 weeks in Tempe woke to find her hands had changed, the softness gone, replaced by calluses forming at the base of each finger. Her arms ached constantly, muscles she'd never known existed protesting their new employment. But she was stronger. She could feel it in the way she swung the axe, in the way she lifted the water buckets, in the way she no longer needed Dalton's help to mount her horse. The evenings were the hardest part. After dinner, after the dishes were washed and put away, there were hours to fill before sleep. Dalton would sit on the porch with his coffee watching the sun set. Tempe would join him, sometimes sitting in the second chair he'd pulled out without comment. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? They were strangers, bound by legal documents and mutual necessity, learning to exist in the same space without friction. But on the 11th night, Dalton broke the silence. "You ever think about leaving?" Tempe considered, lying decided against it. "Every day." "Why don't you?" "Where would I go? I have no money, no family, no prospects. This is the best option I have, which says more about my options than it does about here." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough." "Do you regret it, marrying me?" "Regret's complicated. I regret losing the money I'd saved. Regret complicating my life. But I don't regret keeping you from Grayson. That would have been worse." "Worse for me, you mean?" "Worse for everyone. Men like Grayson, they need to be stopped. Even if it's just once. even if it's just one woman. It was the most he'd said about his motivations. Tempe turned it over in her mind, trying to understand this man who'd upended his life for a stranger's dignity. "You were a ranger," she said. It wasn't a question. She'd seen the way he moved, the way his hand always knew where his gun was, the tactical awareness that never quite switched off. "Long time ago." "Why did you quit?" Dalton was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Because I got tired of killing men who probably deserved it, but maybe didn't. Because the badge started feeling heavier than the gun. Because I wanted to build something instead of just stopping bad things from happening." Did it work? Building instead of stopping. For a while. His voice carried something she couldn't identify. Loss, maybe, or grief. "Then life reminded me that what you build can be taken away just as easy as what you stop." Tempe thought about her father wasting away from cancer that ate him from the inside. About the debts that accumulated while she taught school and tried to keep creditors at bay. About the choice that wasn't a choice between Grayson's cruelty and Dalton's isolation. "I had a good life once," she said. "Father was a schoolmaster. We had a house, books enough to eat. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. Then he got sick and everything fell apart so fast I couldn't stop it. One day I was teaching poetry to girls in clean dresses. The next I was selling our furniture to buy laudanum for the pain. By the end I'd sold everything except what's in that carpet bag. No other family. Mother died when I was 12. No siblings, no aunts or uncles who'd claim me. Just me and debts and a mail-order bride contract I signed because the alternative was starvation." They sat with that, watching stars emerge one by one from the darkening sky. The silence between them felt different now, less empty. More like understanding that didn't need words. "I should tell you something," Dalton said finally, "about why I live out here alone, why I hadn't been to town in 18 months before yesterday." Tempe waited. He'd tell it or he wouldn't. She was learning not to push. "I was married before. Sarah. Met her in 73, not long after I quit the Rangers. Married in 74. She was everything good. Kind patient, wanted a family more than anything. Got pregnant right away. We were so happy." His voice had gone distant. "But the baby came wrong. Breached 2 big complications the midwife couldn't fix. Lost them both. Sarah and our son. Same night, 8 years ago come March." "I'm sorry." Tempe said the words, inadequate but necessary. "The Kincaid trouble came that same year. 3 men trying to take my land, my father's land, legal and proper. They rode up with guns and fake papers. I gave them a chance to leave. They drew first. I was faster." He paused. "The trial cleared me. Self-defense. But after losing Sarah, after killing 3 men in one afternoon, I couldn't stay near people anymore. Couldn't see the pity and the fear mixed together in their eyes. So I came out here, built this place with my own hands. Thought if I worked hard enough, stayed busy enough, the grief would fade. Did it? No, but I learned to carry it better." Tempe understood that. The carrying. The weight that never quite left but settled into different positions until you forgot you were hauling it around. "That's why the separate rooms," she said. "Why you sleep in the loft. That's why Sarah died in that bed. Felt wrong to offer it to someone else. Felt wrong to ask you to sleep where she passed. But you let me have the room. Couldn't put you in the barn, and the loft's barely big enough for me." He paused. "If it bothers you knowing, it doesn't. It's just a room. She's not haunting it." "No, she's not." Dalton stood stretched. "I'm going to check the stock one more time before bed. You should sleep. Big day tomorrow." "What's tomorrow?" "Branding. We've got late calves that need marking before winter." He walked off toward the barn, leaving Tempe alone with the stars and the weight of stories exchanged. She understood him better now. Understood the isolation wasn't misanthropy but self-preservation. Understood the careful distance he maintained wasn't coldness but respect for ghosts. And she understood something else. This partnership, this strange arrangement they'd entered into, might actually become something workable. Not love, neither of them was fool enough to expect that. But maybe respect, maybe friendship, maybe enough to build something that could survive the winter ahead. The third week brought the first real test. Tempe was hanging laundry sheets and shirts she'd learned to wash in the big copper tub soap she'd learned to make from lye and fat when she saw the rider coming up the long drive. She called to Dalton, who emerged from the barn with that particular stillness that meant trouble. The rider was young, maybe 19, wearing a deputy's badge that looked too big for his narrow chest. He reined in well away from the house, showing respect for an armed man's property. "Mr. Kincaid." "That's right. I'm Deputy Harrison. Marshal sent me with this." He held out a folded paper, his hand trembling slightly. Dalton took it, unfolded it, read. His face gave nothing away, but Tempe saw his jaw clench. "What does it say?" she asked. "Warrant for my arrest on charges of abduction and coercion." "That's ridiculous. I came willingly." The deputy looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, Mr. Grayson filed a complaint. Says you were under duress. Says the marriage ain't legal because you couldn't consent freely while being threatened." "I wasn't threatened," Tempe said, anger rising hot in her chest. "I chose. I signed papers in front of witnesses." "Yes, ma'am, but Mr. Grayson, he's got the marshal's ear, and he's awful determined about this." Dalton folded the warrant, handed it back. "Tell the marshal I'll come in tomorrow, peacefully. But I'm not going anywhere until I've secured my stock, Mr. Kincaid. I'm supposed to bring you in now." "You can try." Dalton's hand didn't move toward his gun, but the threat was clear. "Or you can give me 12 hours to make sure my cattle are watered and my wife's not left alone on this ranch with winter coming. Your choice, deputy." The young man swallowed hard. 12 hours. "But if you run—" "I won't run, never have." After the deputy left, Tempe found her voice. "This is my fault. No, it's Grayson's fault. Man doesn't like being crossed." "Meh, what will you do?" "Go to town tomorrow. Face the charges. They won't stick. We've got papers, witnesses. Judge Carver performed the ceremony legal." "Unless Grayson's bought the judge." Dalton smiled without humor. "Then we've got problems. But I don't think he has. Not Judge Carver. Man's ornery enough to resist." That night, Dalton taught Tempe to shoot. He brought out the Winchester rifle and a Colt revolver, set up targets against a fallen log. Showed her how to load, how to sight, how to squeeze the trigger without jerking the barrel off target. "Why are you teaching me this?" she asked. "Because if they arrest me, you'll be here alone. You need to be able to defend yourself." "Defend against what?" "Whatever comes." He positioned her shoulders, adjusted her stance. "Feet shoulder width. Bend your knees slightly. The rifle's going to kick. Don't fight it, just be ready for it." The first shot went wild, the recoil slamming into her shoulder hard enough to bruise. The second shot hit dirt 6 feet to the left. The third clipped the log. "Better," Dalton said. "Now do it 20 more times." By the time darkness fell, Tempe's shoulder ached, and her ears rang, despite the cotton wadding Dalton had given her. But she could hit the target. Not reliably, not quickly, but enough to maybe scare off trouble. "You're a natural," Dalton said, collecting the spent brass. "Steady hands, good eye, just need practice. I don't want to be good at this." "I know, but wanting doesn't change needing." They went inside, ate a cold dinner neither had appetite for. Tomorrow hung between them like a storm building on the horizon. "When you go to town," Tempe said, "I'm coming with you." "No. I'm the one they're claiming was abducted. I need to testify. You need to stay here where it's safe." "Safe?" Tempe laughed harsh. "Dalton, I haven't been safe since my father died. Maybe not even then. I'm coming to town. You can ride ahead of me or beside me, but I'm coming." He studied her across the table, this woman who'd been soft and uncertain 3 weeks ago. Now her hands were calloused, her face sunburned, her eyes hard with determination. "All right," he said finally. "But you stay behind me if there's trouble." "I'll stay beside you. Partners, remember." They rode into Redemption Springs at dawn, arriving before the town woke fully. The marshal's office was a small building next to the jail, and Marshal Dixon was already there, coffee in hand, surprise on his face when he saw Tempe. "Mrs. Ashford," he said. "Didn't expect to see you." Mrs. Kincaid, Tempe corrected. "And I'm here to testify that I married my husband willingly. No coercion, no duress. I chose him over Warren Grayson, and I'd make the same choice every day for the rest of my life." Dixon shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, Mr. Grayson filed charges. Mr. Grayson is angry that I didn't choose him, but anger doesn't make his charges true." Judge Carver arrived summoned by a boy Dixon sent running. The judge listened to both sides read the marriage certificate, examined the partnership agreement that spelled out Tempe's freedom to leave. "This is irregular," he said finally, "but not illegal. Mrs. Kincaid clearly understands her rights and has chosen to exercise them." Charges dismissed. Grayson, who'd arrived with his lawyer halfway through the proceedings, stood abruptly. "This is a mockery. That woman owes me—" "That woman owes you nothing," Judge Carver interrupted. "Her debt was paid in full. You have no claim on her, legal or otherwise. Drop it, Warren. You've lost." But Grayson's eyes, when they met Dalton's, promised this wasn't over. Not by half. They rode home in silence, the tension slowly draining as the town fell away behind them. Halfway to the ranch, Tempe started laughing, a sound that bordered on hysteria. "What's funny?" Dalton asked. "I just told a room full of men I'd choose you every day for the rest of my life. 3 weeks ago, I'd never heard your name. Regret saying it. No, that's what's funny. I meant it." That night, after dinner, after the dishes, after the sun had set and the stars came out, they sat on the porch again. But this time, when their hands brushed on the armrest between their chairs, neither pulled away. It wasn't love. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was something. A beginning. A foundation being laid board by careful board. And in the darkness beyond the lamplight, it was enough. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, carried by Deputy Harrison, 3 weeks after the warrant incident. This time his face was grave, apologetic, even as he handed Dalton the envelope. "Found this at the old Morrison place," the deputy said. "The abandoned homestead north of here. Was checking the property for squatters and found a loose floorboard. There was a cache underneath. Letters, documents, things that looked important. This one had your name on it." Dalton turned the envelope over. His name in handwriting, he recognized Jonathan Thornton, a ranch hand who'd worked for him 5 years back. Good man. Honest. Died in a riding accident, or so they'd said. "Why bring it now?" Dalton asked. "Because the other letters in that cache, they mention Mr. Grayson, and they mention crimes. Figured you'd want to see before I show the marshal." After the deputy left Dalton and Tempe stood in the cabin, the envelope between them like something that might explode. "Jonathan Thornton," Tempe said slowly. "That's almost my father's name. Robert Ashford was my father. Might be coincidence. Or maybe not." She reached for the envelope. "May I?" Dalton handed it over, watched her break the seal with trembling fingers. Inside were 3 pages covered in tight handwriting. Tempe read aloud, her voice growing quieter with each line. "Dalton, if you're reading this, I'm likely dead. By the time you find this, enough time will have passed that the truth needs telling. My real name is Jonathan Thornton. Robert Ashford, who went by the name Thornton before he moved east, was my older brother. I came west after a disagreement with our father, took work where I could find it, kept my past buried." Tempe's hand went to her mouth. "He was my uncle, my father's brother. There was a scandal, gambling debts, I think. Uncle Jonathan left when I was 6. I barely remember him." Dalton gestured for her to continue. "I've been watching Warren Grayson for 2 years now, working his cattle drives, keeping my head down, listening. The man's a snake. He's been rustling from small ranchers, forging land deeds, running schemes that would put him in federal prison if anyone could prove it. I've been collecting evidence. Dates, amounts, witness names. It's all hidden at the old mining office 20 miles north in the safe behind the false wall in the back room." Tempe looked up. "There's more. Keep reading. Last month I made a mistake. I sent a letter to my brother Robert warning him about Grayson. Told him the banker was crooked, told him not to take any loans, but the letter never reached him. Grayson controls the telegraph office, reads mail that comes through. 3 days after I sent it, Robert wrote back asking about loan terms for medical treatment. I tried to send another warning, but it was too late. Grayson approved the loan at 40% interest, illegal in Texas, but legal where Robert lived. Tempe's voice cracked. My father. He tried to warn my father. There's more, Dalton said gently. She steadied herself, continued. 2 weeks ago, I learned Grayson sent an enforcer to Philadelphia. A man who uses poison makes it look like natural death. I believe Robert is in danger. I've tried to send word but can't trust the telegraph. I'm leaving this letter at your ranch, Dalton, because you're the only man I trust. You're also the only man who can't be bought or scared off. If something happens to me, if my niece Temperance comes west, she'll need protection. The evidence at the mining office will bring Grayson down, but someone has to retrieve it. I'm sorry to burden you with this, but Robert's daughter deserves better than Grayson's trap, and the truth deserves daylight. Your friend Jonathan. Silence filled the cabin. Tempe folded the letter with careful precision, her hands steady despite the tears tracking down her face. He tried to save my father, she whispered. Died trying. Grayson found out, Dalton said. Had him killed, made it look like an accident. And then went after my father anyway. Gave him the loan, knowing he'd die. Knowing I'd inherit the debt. Knowing he could. She couldn't finish. Dalton crossed to her, put his hands on her shoulders. Not pulling her close, just anchoring her while the world tilted. We have a choice, he said. We can let this go, live quiet, stay safe, or we can get that evidence and finish what Jonathan started. Tempe looked up at him, her eyes fierce through the tears. That's not a choice, that's a test. And I already know which side of it I'm on. It'll be dangerous. Good. Grayson won't let us walk away if we go after him. Then we'd better not miss. She pulled away, paced to the window. My uncle died trying to protect my father. My father died in debt to the man who killed his brother. I'm not letting that stand. Dalton felt something shift in his chest. This woman who'd come to him soft and scared had found steel somewhere in the past month. Found it in fence wire and rifle practice, and choosing to stay when she could have run. We'll need help, he said. Who? I might know someone. The someone turned out to be a man Dalton hadn't seen in 8 years. Caleb Kincaid rode up to Broken Creek Ranch 2 days after Dalton sent word, and the tension in Dalton's shoulders told Tempe this was complicated history. Caleb was 30 years old, lean and weathered, with eyes the same storm gray as Dalton's. He dismounted slowly, his hand never far from his gun, his gaze taking in everything. Dalton, Caleb. They stood 20 feet apart, 2 men with shared blood and shared pain. Didn't think I'd hear from you again, Caleb said. Didn't think I'd send word. But here we are. Tempe stepped onto the porch and both men's attention shifted to her. She saw Caleb's eyes narrow, calculating, reading the situation. This the mail-order bride? Caleb asked. This is my wife Temperance. Tempe, this is Caleb Kincaid. Your brother, she guessed. Brother of the men I killed, Dalton corrected quietly. The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Tempe looked between them, understanding dawning. This was the ghost Dalton had been living with. This was the blood on his hands that wouldn't wash clean. They came to take my land, Dalton said. His voice was steady, but Tempe could hear the old pain underneath. My father's land, legal deed paid in full. But the Kincaids wanted it. 3 of them rode up with guns and threats, fake papers from a crooked lawyer. This was 74, same year I lost Sarah. I gave them a chance to leave. They drew first. I was faster. You killed my father and 2 of my brothers, Caleb said. There was no heat in it, just statement of fact. I was 22, off on a cattle drive. Came back to 3 graves and a town calling you a murderer. The trial said self-defense. The trial said a lot of things. Caleb dismounted fully now, his hands careful and visible. I spent 8 years hating you. 8 years planning what I'd do when I found you. So why didn't you? Tempe asked. The question was bold, maybe foolish, but she needed to understand. Caleb's eyes shifted to her and she saw something unexpected there. Grief. Exhaustion. The weight of carrying hate for too long. Because about 2 years ago I found my father's journals, found letters between him and that crooked lawyer, found the plan they had to force Dalton off his land, legal or not. Found out my brothers were the aggressors, that they drew first. That everything the trial said was true, and I'd been hating a man for defending what was his. So you came here to, Dalton prompted, to tell you I was wrong, to say I'm done hunting you, Caleb's jaw worked, to apologize for 8 years of wanting you dead for something you had every right to do. The silence that followed was profound. Tempe watched Dalton's face, saw the emotion he was fighting to contain. Relief, maybe. Or something deeper, absolution for a guilt he'd carried despite being legally justified. I'm sorry too, Dalton said finally. Your family was your family, whatever they did. I took them from you. That's not nothing. No, it's not. Caleb stepped forward, extended his hand. But it's done, and I'm tired of being angry. Dalton took the offered hand. They shook once firm, a contract signed in grip and silence. Now, Caleb said, your message said you had a job needed doing. Something about Warren Grayson and evidence worth dying for. Over coffee at the kitchen table, they laid it out. Jonathan's letter, the evidence at the mining office, Grayson's crimes stretching back years, the danger of going after the most powerful man in 3 counties. Caleb listened without interruption, his face impassive. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair. I'll help you, he said. Why? Tempe asked. This isn't your fight. Grayson bought my family's land for pennies on the dollar after my father died. Legal, but barely. I've got my own score to settle. He looked at Dalton. Besides, I owe this man. Figure helping him stay alive evens the ledger some. It's a 3-day ride to the mining office, Dalton said. Dangerous territory. Grayson has men patrolling his land, and we'll have to cross it. Then we'd better be smart about it. I'm coming too, Tempe said. Both men turned to her. Dalton started to shake his head, but she cut him off. Don't. I can shoot now. I can ride. And this is my uncle's evidence, my father's death, my right to be there. Tempe, I'm not asking permission, Dalton. I'm telling you, I'm coming. You can ride ahead of me, behind me, or beside me. But I'm coming. Caleb smiled slightly. She's got spine. I like her. She's going to get herself killed, Dalton muttered. Probably, but she's right. It's her fight too. They left before dawn, 3 riders heading north across land that grew progressively rougher. The plains gave way to broken country mesas and arroyos that could hide an army. They rode in silence, mostly Caleb leading Dalton, bringing up the rear, Tempe in the middle, where she was most protected. The first day passed without incident. They camped in a dry wash, no fire-cold jerky, and water for dinner. Tempe lay wrapped in her bedroll, listening to the men's quiet conversation. She really can shoot, Caleb asked. Better than I expected, not great, but competent. You trust her? Pause. Then, yes. Even though you barely know her, I know enough. She's chosen to stay when she could have run, chosen to fight when she could have hidden. That's all I need to know. Tempe closed her eyes, something warm settling in her chest. Trust, hard-earned and carefully given, worth more than gold. The second day brought trouble. They were crossing a narrow canyon when Tempe's horse suddenly shied, nearly throwing her. Dalton's hand went to his gun as Caleb scanned the rim above. Riders, Caleb said quietly. 4 of them, maybe 5. Tempe saw them now, silhouettes against the sky. Armed men watching. Graysons, she asked. Likely. Question is whether they're going to make a move. The answer came in the form of gunfire. Bullets kicked up dirt in front of them, a warning shot that was also a promise. Ride, Dalton shouted. They spurred their horses into a gallop, racing down the canyon as more shots echoed off the stone walls. Tempe bent low over her horse's neck, her heart hammering every childhood prayer she'd learned, coming back in a desperate rush. A bullet whined past her ear. Another hit the rock face beside her, spraying chips of stone. She heard Caleb return fire, his rifle sharp and precise, and then they were out of the canyon and into open country where the horses could run. They didn't stop for 2 miles. When they finally slowed, all three were breathing hard, the horses lathered with sweat. "Everyone all right?" Dalton asked. "Fine," Tempe managed, though her hands were shaking. "I winged one of them," Caleb said. "Saw him fall back. But there were more than 4, maybe 8. "They know where we're going," Dalton said. "Then we'd better get there first." The old mining office stood at the base of a played-out silver claim, a weathered building slowly being reclaimed by the desert. They approached carefully, weapons ready, but the place was empty. Abandoned years ago when the ore ran out and the dreams died with it. Inside was darkness and dust and the smell of decay. Dalton lit a lantern while Caleb kept watch at the door. Tempe followed Dalton to the back room where a false wall had been partially torn away, revealing a safe behind it. "Can you open it?" she asked. "Maybe, if I had dynamite. Or if you had this." Caleb appeared in the doorway holding a piece of paper. Found it tucked in the doorframe. Combination written in pencil. The safe opened with 3 turns and a satisfying click. Inside was a leather-bound ledger and a stack of letters. Dalton pulled them out, handed them to Tempe. She opened the ledger to a random page. Columns of numbers, dates, names. Cattle sales that didn't match registry records. Land deeds with forged signatures. Loans at illegal interest rates. Page after page of methodical crime, all in Jonathan's careful handwriting. "This is it," she breathed. "This will destroy him." "If we can get it to the right people," Caleb said. "Federal marshal, maybe? Someone Grayson can't buy." "There's a circuit judge," Dalton said. "Carver, honest man. He comes through Redemption Springs once a month." "When's his next visit?" "Week from today." "Then we have to survive a week with every gun Grayson owns looking for us," Caleb said. "Might be a problem." The problem announced itself that night. They'd made camp in a defensible position, a ring of boulders that gave cover on 3 sides. Tempe was taking first watch when she heard the horses, multiple riders moving fast. She woke the men with a hand over each mouth the way Dalton had taught her. Silent, urgent. They had weapons in hand before the sleep left their eyes. "How many?" Dalton whispered. "I count 8, maybe 10. Grayson's not playing anymore." They came at dawn when the light was tricky and aim uncertain. 10 men spread in a semicircle, rifles, ready, blocking the only easy exit. The leader was a man Tempe recognized from town. Grayson's foreman, a hard-faced bastard named Cole, who did the cattle baron's dirty work. "Kincaid," he called. "Send out the ledger, and we'll let you ride away." Grayson's generous offer. "Grayson's a liar," Dalton called back. "Your choice, easy way or hard way." "How about a third way?" Caleb said, loud enough to carry. "You boys ride off now we forget you were here. Otherwise people are going to die, and I guarantee some of them will be you." Cole laughed. 3 against 10, I'll take those odds." "Then you're dumber than you look," Tempe said, surprising herself. Her rifle was up-sighted on Cole's chest. Her hands were steady. "First bullet's for you. Die knowing you lost to a schoolteacher." There was a pause, then Cole spat. "Kill them." What followed was chaos measured in seconds that felt like hours. Tempe fired, saw Cole drop, didn't know if she'd hit him or if he'd ducked. Dalton's rifle barked twice, dropping 2 riders. Caleb's revolver sang its deadly song, precise and merciless. The attackers returned fire bullets, sparking off rock, whining through the air. Tempe loaded and fired with mechanical precision, everything Dalton taught her, coming back. Sight, breathe, squeeze. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, a bruise she'd feel for days. A bullet took the hat off her head. Another hit the rock an inch from her face, stinging her cheek with stone chips. She didn't flinch, couldn't afford to. Beside her, Dalton fought with the calm of a man who'd done this before. Each shot deliberate, each movement economical. This was what he'd been, she realized. Before the ranch, before the solitude. This was the ranger who'd tracked killers across hostile country. "Reloading," Caleb called. Tempe shifted position, covered his angle, fired twice at a man trying to flank them. Missed once, hit once. The man went down screaming. And then, as suddenly as it started, it was over. The remaining attackers were retreating, dragging their wounded, leaving 3 bodies behind. Cole among them, shot through the chest, still breathing, but not for long. Dalton approached, carefully kicked the dying man's gun away. "Who sent you?" Cole coughed blood. "You know who. Say it." "Grayson. Said, bring back the ledger, or don't come back." "Where is he?" "Town. Waiting." "Tell him something for me." Dalton leaned close. "Tell him we're coming, and we're bringing everything Jonathan found." Cole died before he could respond. They rode into Redemption Springs 3 days later, battered and exhausted, carrying evidence that would hang a powerful man. Tempe's face was bruised where flying rock had struck her. Dalton had a graze across his ribs that he'd wrapped, but refused to acknowledge. Caleb had taken a bullet through the meat of his thigh and rode with gritted teeth. But they had the ledger, and they had each other. Judge Carver was at the hotel preparing for his circuit. Dalton walked in first, the ledger under his arm, Tempe and Caleb flanking him. "Judge, got something you need to see." What followed was 2 hours of testimony. Tempe reading from Jonathan's letters. Dalton explaining the gunfights, the attempts to stop them. Caleb corroborating, adding his own knowledge of Grayson's land grabs. And the ledger speaking for itself, numbers that couldn't lie, names that could be verified. Evidence that would stand up in any court, corrupt or otherwise. "This is damning," Judge Carver said finally. "Federal crimes, some of them. I'll need to contact the marshal in Austin." "How long?" Dalton asked. "Week, maybe 2. And in the meantime, Grayson walks free. In the meantime, I put him under house arrest and post guards I trust." The judge looked at each of them in turn. "You 3 have made powerful enemies. Be careful." They emerged into afternoon sunlight to find half the town gathered. Word had spread. The schoolteacher and the hermit, and the ghost, they were calling them. The unlikely trio who'd taken on Warren Grayson. Grayson himself stood across the street, flanked by lawyers, his face a mask of controlled fury. "You've made a mistake, Kincaid," he called. "No," Tempe said, stepping forward. "You made the mistake. You killed my uncle. You killed my father. You thought you could break me. But here I stand." "You're a fool if you think this evidence will hold up." "Federal court," Judge Carver interrupted from the hotel doorway. "It'll hold up just fine there. Mr. Grayson, you're under arrest pending investigation. You can come peacefully or in chains." The moment stretched. Grayson's hand moved toward his gun. Dalton's moved faster. The click of a hammer being cocked echoed in the sudden silence. "Don't," Dalton said quietly. "You've lost. Accept it with dignity." Grayson's hand moved away from his gun. His shoulders dropped. And just like that, the most powerful man in 3 counties became just another criminal being led away by the law. 6 months later, Tempe stood on the porch of Broken Creek Ranch, watching the sun set over land she'd come to love. The winter had been hard, but they'd survived it. The cattle had prospered. The ranch showed profit for the first time in 3 years. Caleb had stayed on, taking the small line shack on the northern property, helping with the work, earning his keep and his redemption. He and Dalton had found something neither expected: brotherhood rebuilt from the ashes of old hatred. Grayson was in federal prison, sentenced to 15 years. His lands had been sold at auction, distributed to the people he'd stolen from. Justice imperfect but real. And Tempe had found something she'd never expected to find: home. Not in Philadelphia with its cobblestones and culture, but here, in the vast silence of the plains, in the hard work of building something that mattered. Dalton emerged from the barn, saw her on the porch, smiled the smile that still surprised her with its warmth. He climbed the steps, 2 cups of coffee in hand, settled into the chair beside her. "Any regrets?" he asked. It had become their ritual question. "Just one," she said. "What's that?" "I regret not knowing sooner. About this place, about you, about who I could be out here. You knew when you needed to." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge one by one. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. Closer in the bunkhouse, Caleb was playing harmonica, the sound carrying in the still air. "Dalton," Tempe said after a while. "Yeah, thank you." "For what? For seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for offering partnership when you could have offered ownership, for teaching me to fight. You did the fighting. I just handed you the rifle. Still." He reached across the space between their chairs, took her hand. It was calloused now, rough with work, strong in ways it had never been. She laced her fingers through his, felt the rightness of it. "Tempe," he said. "Yeah, I love you." The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. She turned to look at him, saw the vulnerability in his face, the fear that she might not feel the same. "I love you too," she said. "Took me a while to recognize it, but I do." He stood, pulled her up, kissed her, with a tenderness that made her heart ache. Not the desperate kiss of strangers making bad choices, but the considered kiss of partners who'd earned each other through trial and truth. That night, for the first time, Tempe didn't sleep in the room that had been his mother's. She climbed the ladder to the loft, to the bed where Dalton had slept alone for 8 years, and together they wrote a new chapter. Not marriage of convenience anymore, but marriage of choice, of love, of two broken people who'd found wholeness in each other's arms. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass. The creek ran its broken path around the boulder, dividing and rejoining. And somewhere in the darkness, a promise was kept. A man could survive 8 years alone. But living real living required something more. Required trust. Required partnership. Required the courage to open doors you'd nailed shut and let someone in. Dalton Kincaid had survived. But Tempe had taught him to live again. And that in the end was worth more than all the gold, in all the safes, in all the mining towns that dotted the vast Texas plains.